Well, hey everybody, glad you're here. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here at Eastlake. And if it is your first time, if you're a guest with us today, I want to say you picked an interesting, I think great weekend, but an interesting weekend. Today, I want to have a little bit more of a family chat, a family conversation. I'm inviting us all to the dinner table as much as I can on video in multiple locations. But um, I know many of you might be aware that an article came out in Time magazine that included um, testimony from me and our church's journey from a pastoral leadership team position on our desire to pursue full inclusion for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people, our brothers and sisters who often have been cast out of the church. And I had a different message plan for today, but one, did not know when that article was going to come out. When I agreed to answer questions about the journey that we've been on, I was made aware that even the person writing the article didn't really have much control over that. And so I had planned to speak on this deliberately on February 8th. When this gracious reporter extended to me the opportunity to remain anonymous, because it mattered to me that the timing would happen, that I would get to tell you guys my journey, explain where I've been, our journey as a staff and as a pastoral leadership team, and then the article would come out. That was my preferred timing. But when it became clear that there was a possibility that that would come out before I had that opportunity, Elizabeth, who wrote the article, was very gracious and offered, would I prefer to remain anonymous? And I considered that. However, I couldn't bear the thought that I would be telling my dear friends who are a part of the LGBT community that I stood up for them, but that I did it behind a curtain. And so, half reluctantly, I decided to allow that to come out, even though the timing might not have been perfect. And my reasoning for that, for those of you who have been wondering maybe, I think it's understandable as a part of this church if you feel like, gosh, I wish he would have spoken to us first. And I respect that and I understand that. However, I hope that you can understand that as I made the decision to not remain nameless and faceless, I did it weighing the two realities. Would I care more about a group of heterosexual Christians who, rightly so, would have an expectation of inclusion at any church at any time? Or would I prioritize the voices and the hearts of those who are more marginalized? And so I decided to side where I felt like the Spirit of Jesus would side with the timing. And so I say that to say to those of you who felt a little bit betrayed that came out before I had an opportunity to address you, forgive me. Forgive me in understanding why I made that decision to allow that to come out rather than to remain anonymous. I want to take the rest of our time this morning that I get to speak just to tell you a little bit about the journey for me. First thing I want to say is it hasn't been easy. For my wife and I, not because we have been in opposition, but because we do understand that this has been a conversation that has created relational strife. It's split families apart. It's separated churches. And some of the conversations that we've had with those who are part of our community here and those who are outside, some have been blissfully joyful experiences, and others have been incredibly painful. But 5 years ago, the journey really began for me as I started to look back into something that for me had been a closed conversation. I thought I had the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth when it came to these questions. But because those of you who have been around Eastlake know, I've always been a pursuer of truth, no matter where it leads me, no matter what it costs me. I feel like a move of the Spirit pressed me to once again consider what I previously had thought had been settled. I read a lot. And contrary to maybe majority opinion, it's taking the Bible seriously that brought me to this reconsideration. I read over 70 books after I was finished with my research and study in the original languages of the biblical texts surrounding this conversation. I read on both sides of the issue, from the crazy everybody's going to hell unless side to the hey, whatever, doesn't matter side, and everything in between. And this is partly why it took 5 years. I heard stories. Many of you here at the church who are a part of the LGBT community have been gracious enough to invite me into the holy space of your story. I've read and studied and listened to the stories of psychological damage, of family separation. I've been made aware of the reality that 40% of homeless teens in our country identify as LGBT. And I became increasingly more and more aware that the fruit, regardless of the position, the fruit of the church's position towards our brothers and sisters in the LGBT community has not been good. It's not been bearing beautiful fruit. And so we entered a season of listening. And my friend Stan reminds me often that Jesus didn't say they have mouths but cannot speak. He liked to put the emphasis instead on it's ears that we have, but we cannot listen. And so we have been in a season as a staff of listening, of opening ourselves up, trying to speak less and listen more. A couple years ago, we visited a church in Colorado that I had wanted to visit. I'm grateful for the work of Jeff Chu, and he had mentioned a church in there that I felt intrigued to visit. And so we went there. He brought many of our pastors on our team. And as we entered this church, which is an open and affirming church, I could feel just in my body the visceral reactions that I was having to the experience, the stress and the anxiety. My stomach knotted as I went in. I didn't exactly know what to expect. Of course, I brought my assumptions and my categorizations in with me. But as I worshiped in a room full of people who might not identify as heterosexual, something began to happen in me that was both beautiful and traumatic. And in us, as I looked down the row of my co-laborers here on staff at Eastlake, it was hard to find a dry eye. Something was happening as we sat in a space where those who the church has traditionally rejected worshiped in spirit and in truth and in community. And at the end of the service, there was a time to receive communion. And I remember feeling like a prompting of the Spirit to not go down and receive communion, but to go down and receive a hug. Two of the gentlemen who had welcomed me at the front doors could be seen clearly down at the front serving communion. And I felt a clear call to go down and ask for a hug. I'm laughing. That's a laugh. And I remember being very clear to that still small voice, no, thank you. I said, no, thank you. That's weird. And I'll probably weep. And so, to my great shame, I report to you today that I did not do that. and I let my fear keep me in my seat because I didn't know how to handle the emotional rush that I was dealing with at the time. I did go down and receive communion. That was emotional enough, but I could hide it behind the beauty of what we get to experience regularly as we break bread together. A couple weeks ago, I got to go to the Gay Christian Network Conference. That was in Portland. Again, we brought many of our staff team who could make it. And to make a long story short, there were many transformative interactions, introductions, embraces. One specific serendipitous moment would be when the Westboro Baptists and other more fundamental churches had been outside and they'd been picketing with their signs of God hates fags or whatever else they put on those horrific things. But this photo, I wanted to share with you what ended up happening right over the top of them. A beautiful rainbow standing right above them. And I don't know if that contributed to why they ended up leaving so quickly, like, oh, that's a trump card. But anyway, it was an interesting happening. Later in the second day, there was a moment after sweet Vicky Beeching had shared her her plenary session, and 3 women came up on stage to lead us in an a cappella version of Amazing Grace. And as I listened to the voices collected in the room of over 1,000 LGBT Christians and their straight allies, I wept openly because it was so beautiful. It's so redemptive. I was inspired by Justin Lee, who runs the organization itself, who is himself gay, and I just inspired as we have become better friends over phone and text, how he runs an organization of people who don't see this the same. Gay, bisexual, transgender people who don't approach this with total agreement, and how they themselves, and by the way, they're the ones who are really affected by it, they themselves are committed to walking in unity despite their disagreement. My friends Rob and Linda Robertson, who they run a blog, in fact, Huffington Post had picked up their story, justbecausehebreathes.com, and their story of their gay son coming out to them has deeply shaped me and us here. They invited me to a midweek group that they have for LGBT Christians and those who are just seeking a safe place. And as I walked into their home, I was warmly greeted by everyone and nervous to be invited into such a sacred space that they have come to find so safe. They introduced me and my wife, Michelle, and they took a moment to ask everyone to share their woundings and their stories as it related to the church. And it was really hard to hear. Some shared how this group had been the only thing that had literally kept them alive through suicide attempts or otherwise. And then, what I was not expecting was they said, we'd like to pray for you guys right now. And as these people laid their hands on us and prayed, they too wept openly, saying things like, I'm scared to hope again that it might be possible to find a safe place, to be loved as I am. One of the things that I've been reflecting on often in this process has been the story that's recorded for us in the New Testament of the Apostle Peter, who roughly 10 years after the resurrection is praying on a rooftop in Joppa. And he has a vision, and depending on your translation, a trance. But if that scares you, just switch your translation and you can find something much more palatable. But something that, long story short, he realizes as God begins to reveal to him, actually call him to do something that his sacred text told him not to do, that forbid him to do it, to enter the home of a Gentile, to associate with such people. And the communication of God is, do not call unclean what I have called clean. And so Peter leaves and he meets with the church. And he says, I now see that God shows no favoritism, but he accepts everyone who does what is right and fears the Lord. And it just struck me how often I can read that story and have it not impact me, where the gravity of what has changed in human history through Jesus, and through specifically this moment, this trance, this vision that Peter has literally transformed the Western world, if not the world itself. As a non-Jew or Gentile myself, and I'm guessing many of you, we're all in on a vision. Peter didn't return with Torah to quote. Instead, he returns with something that in many ways countermands his own sacred texts. And so even 10 years after the resurrection, the church is still debating, do people have to become Jewish and obey the Mosaic law in order to follow Jesus? And everything changes. And so I'm guessing for the most of us, non-Jews, as Gentiles, as adopted Gentiles, I wonder how it is that we, the adopted Gentiles, so often enter and then close the circle behind us and decide who else is no longer accepted and welcomed into the family. As I read that story, I'm reminded that inclusivity should be our instinct, even if a debate is necessary. That we should lean towards inclusion and love as adopted children ourselves. 10 years ago, we started this church, and we like to use the phrase a lot, to church for the rest of us. A place for those, perhaps, who don't fit neatly into religious circles, or who have had wounding, painful church experiences, people who do not believe, people who struggle with doubt, like myself. And historically, our stance has been traditional, I think, evangelical. Though I've been baptizing gay and lesbian folks into the family here at Eastlake for over 8 years. But when the question would arise of who could lead a group, or who could join the staff or be an intern, we didn't have a policy that was anti, but we did say, well, we need to have a conversation. We need to have a conversation. But starting 5 years ago, I became increasingly more concerned and internally bothered by that. And I confess that in my fear, I chose to instead just simply remain silent as I processed and as we journeyed as a family and as a staff. But last year, one of my dear friends, my wife and I like to go on vacations with this person, my wonderful friend who is on staff and leads music. She invited me into an office and said, I need to tell you something. And through tears, she began to explain to me that she was gay, that she didn't necessarily know, but that she'd fallen in love with a woman. In fact, another one of our wonderful and dearest friends. But as I watched her physical and emotional response to coming out to me, I thought, you know me. She knows what we've been processing as a staff. She's never heard a shaming sentence come out of my mouth. But as she explained to me that she was in fear, wondering if it would be her last day at Eastlake, my heart broke. And I realized that my silence is also communicating loud. And it kicked this whole thing into high gear for me and for us as she graciously became vulnerable with us as a team. And we extended grace to her. I realized there had to, in a church our size, there had to be hundreds of folks who love this church and who feel they're welcome, but are always wondering in the back of their mind when that second shoe is going to drop, when the Jim Crow law starts, when are they going to point out that other water fountain that I have to drink from? And I've been asked many times over the last year and few months especially, is now the right time? Are you sure it's the right time? And I got to be honest, I feel like it's the wrong question. Have we not paid attention to the news? Are we not aware of the psychological trauma that our brothers and sisters have had to face? Mostly because of a rhetoric of contempt that has come from the church. Children have been kicked out of their homes. Are we not aware of the suicide rates and the bullying? The question is not, is now the right time? The question to me is, how many more kids need to commit suicide before we start taking this seriously? And at least, whether you agree with me or not, at least saying the fruit is bad. Something has to shift. So let's at least have a conversation. And that's why today I want to be really clear that as a pastoral team, and as much as probably someone will try to spin this and say, Ryan, the dictator, made a decision and whatever. That's not how we do things here, as much as you'd like to believe that. As much as I'd enjoy that, actually. But we did this in an unanimous movement, trusting that we really believed that the Holy Spirit is what brought us to this. I need to say this really clearly because words matter. At Eastlake, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people, brothers and sisters, you are officially encouraged and supported to be involved in the life and work of this church at all levels. I want you to know that this is a place where you can be known and celebrated, and you can find belonging. And I want to say specifically to you, the fact that you're even here says so much about you. The courage that it has taken you, I don't know how many times, to be vulnerable one more time, to place your heart out in front of you as you seek God and community, to know that a wounding may be yet on the way. I think that says so much about you. One thing that I have learned is we have attempted in this journey to listen and to understand the other, to study scientifically and theologically. What we have actually come to know in the process is that we've learned a lot about ourselves. And you inspire me. I'm amazed with the grace and the patience that you have had for me and for this conversation as it unfolds at this time in human history. And finally, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I did not do this sooner, because I've been here in my heart, but I've been afraid. But no more. No more. Some of you may not be familiar with the language of side A or side B. This describes the two majority positions within, especially the evangelical church, on questions related to LGBT inclusion. Side A would be the perspective that I've just laid out before you. Full inclusion. People encouraged to participate in the body and life of the church, at membership, with the sacraments of baptism and communion, as well as the human sacraments of child dedication and marriage. Side B position would be to say, and actually for clarification, let me go way out there and say, I know there's a really small position called Westboro Baptist or anything else that just says, hey, if you're gay, you're going straight to hell. Now, I don't think we really have to entertain that insanity. So side B would be not that, and where I think maybe there's a certain percentage of you here at Eastlake who maybe at the very least have traditionally held this view, and that would be that LGBT folks are welcome and loved and encouraged to participate. But in order to be in a position of leadership, you must commit to a life of celibacy. I believe that that comes from good intentions. I really do. I know those of you who believe this too well to call you homophobes or haters. This conversation is way too nuanced for such labels. It doesn't serve to move the conversation forward, and it doesn't promote love and unity. But while I understand that well-intentioned extending of a welcome and a love also does come with it a bit of a hierarchy of rules. And here's kind of how far you can go. A new Jim Crow, in a sense. You're equal, but not. And while I understand that side B perspectives can be viewed within those who hold side B as a welcoming option for those others, you're welcomed and loved. I want to just be clear that as a person who lands side A myself and as a pastoral team, we extend that same grace. Side B folks, you are welcome here. We love you. In fact, we don't want to limit your involvement at all. We would go beyond that to say you're welcome as well, just like all folks, to be in participation in any way. But we don't necessarily agree with that position. And I hope that you can accept that we do believe that that too is loving, even though you're sitting perhaps at a different side of the table in this conversation. I want to be really clear that I do not think it's good enough to just change the terms and the labels, and in order to rescue an excluded class, to create a new one. This conversation has too often led to a divide where you must agree. And if you've been around Eastlake for any length of time, come on, you've got to disagree with me about a number of things before this. And I always wonder, what is it about us at this time when we think that that's what church is? Go to the place where you agree with everyone. Good gravy. That's not a family. That's a cult, right? If you have to agree with everything I think, you should leave because of that, not, let alone my perhaps divergent views from your own. Judgment is wrong, no matter how reprehensible we may see the opposing viewpoint to be. But I do want to say that I recognize that for some, it is intolerable to even open the conversation. Like I used to think, you remain convinced that you know God's heart unequivocally on this matter. And you cannot bear that, to be a part of this. And I'd be a hypocrite if I said I don't understand that. Because at this point in my own journey, I cannot bear to move forward in my life a part of a faith community where my friends are not welcomed to both serve and receive communion, to have equal welcome into the community of Christianity, of following Jesus. And so I have no hatred for you. But I do long for a church, and this has been an experiment for about 10 years, But I hope that my extension of inclusion is heard loud and clear, that this is now not a place to just reverse the judgment back the direction of anyone who disagrees with what I'm saying today. I want this to be a church where my friend, who when I first met him was in a same-sex relationship and is now married to a woman with a kid, I want Eastlake to be a safe place where his journey is honored as his unique journey. And I want a place where your homophobic grandmother could be welcomed as well. And where, of course, my friends who are a part of the LGBT community and our community are also welcomed and affirmed and celebrated. And so I want to conclude by asking you to consider, especially those of you who are really uncomfortable right now. Maybe it's been hard to hear. You might need to watch this online later, because sometimes so much happens when we hear information we disagree with that it's hard to listen, and I recognize that. In April, we're going to be hosting a conversation. It's actually a bit of a conference on a Wednesday night. It's called Together in This, a conversation on sexuality, inclusivity, and the future of the church. And my own journey took me 5 years. I don't expect that this little talk, or storytelling, I guess, that I'm doing today is going to change anyone. But I want to ask you, I don't know if dare you is the right word, but maybe even beg you, even if you see this differently, would you risk the next few months as we head towards that event in April and just test the fruit? Journey with us as we continue, because from this point forward, we're going to keep doing what we've always done as we aim for Jesus, as we aim for the embodiment of the kingdom among us, reconciliation, renewal, and restoration for the flourishing of all people. That's where we're headed, to Jesus, to the kingdom, to the beauty and the work of Christ in all things. Would you hang out for a while, engage in conversation, especially with the staff who's been a part of this for so long, as we now extend that conversation and include you, and then commit to being there. At the very least, disagree once you've heard what you're disagreeing with clearly. And finally, to those who are really with me on this, and like you're as excited as you've ever been, I just want to ask you to remain merciful and humble. That we need to strive for unity and love and patience, humility. We cannot label people who disagree with us and anathematize them or demonize people just because they have a different viewpoint. Remembering every viewpoint is simply a view from a point. Let us move forward and preserve the bond of unity in Christ. And I want to say thank you for having grace with me. I think there's something happens when a church grows large or fast, where sometimes the caricature of the lead person becomes superhuman in some weird way, or inhuman at the very least, when the truth is, I am every bit as human as you. And I'm just on a journey with God. And I've gotten stuff wrong along the way, and I've gotten stuff right. I've been able to participate in beautiful works of reconciliation and wholeness in the lives of people. And though I am not 100% certain about anything in this life, I am sufficiently and confidently certain that this move is right in the heart of the redemptive move of Jesus Christ in our age. I hope that you'll give me the opportunity over the next few months and at this event to clearly share with you the beautiful truth that I believe God is moving everyone into. As we move toward a time of response today and an opportunity to receive communion, I'd like to read the prayer of St. Francis as a meditation that we can go into the response time with. Let me read it to you. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.